Welcome into the latest edition of Unpaid Interns. Austin Render and Connor Hines here with you on Monday, June 22nd. Another edition of Unpaid Interns, Connor, and two more great guests. Today we have LaMond Pope from the Chicago Tribune. He'll be talking Chicago White Sox baseball, and if there will be Chicago White Sox baseball, that's still to be determined. And then we'll have Ben Portnoy from the Columbus Dispatch in Mississippi coming on to talk as Mississippi has become the hub of sports news right now with everything going on in the state of Mississippi. So we'll get Ben's take on that as well. But I do want to let's stay in the college sports realm, kind of with what's happening in Mississippi, but in more of a broad sense. Football teams are trying to come back. Other athletic teams are trying to come back. But the big story is the football teams. I mean, every team seems to come back. And then we get a report, 13 positive cases, 8 positive cases, 10 positive cases. Is this something that should be concerning? Is this something we should have expected? Or is this something that, man, football probably not going to happen?
Yes, and yes again. I mean, we've talked about it for at least a few weeks now. I mean, if there's going to be any hurdle with getting any sport back to a resemblance of normalcy, it's going to be college football. And, football in general, yes. But as I think you mentioned last week, Austin, I think the NFL happens regardless because they have tighter control on their players. And it's a smaller league. You have 32 teams. College football, you have, numerous, leagues spread across Division I alone. Then you have Division II and III. I mean, we've talked about this time and time again. I believe it was Kansas State that had 14 players test positive there. Obviously, the defending national champions, LSU, had, I think, at least 30 players test positive. They all, got it from a single source. It's by far and away going to be the toughest to get back. There have been a lot of talks about, maybe we see a college football season without the Pac-12. Maybe we see a college football season where you have, teams playing other teams exclusively in their conference only. But at a certain point, it's like, how much does that really help? Because you just have so many guys in a locker room together.
Well, the Pac-12 was initially like the hot spot because of the state of California. And Arizona is a hot spot right now. They have kind of lost control in Arizona. But it's almost expanded. I don't think the Pac-12 should be the punching bag right now. I mean, Florida is one of the worst states in the country. And you're talking about prominent SEC with Florida, prominent ACC schools with Florida State and Miami. In the heart of Florida, in Orlando, one of the top non-Power 5 teams, UCF. So there's plenty of issues outside of the Pac-12. I think at first it was like, oh yeah, the Pac-12 is going to struggle because they're based with a lot of teams in California and Washington where things have spiked, but things are spiking everywhere right now. And I don't know. I've talked to a doctor last week, and he said, you know what? The cases are going to go up. We're testing more. The question is, are hospitalizations going to go up? Are deaths going to go up? So I don't think it's a shock that we're seeing players test positive. Do these schools have the proper protocols to keep everything going? Because
and you know what?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, absolutely, completely agree with everything you're saying there, and it's inevitable at this point. But I think you mentioned last week, we can't see we can't see a college football season without like Alabama.
Yeah, and you look on the other coast, USC,
right,
Oregon.
Right.
Those are schools you just can't go without.
There's gonna come a time though where the NCAA has to either decide whether carrying on without some schools is going to outweigh, the opposite, which would be not having a college football season at all. Like, it's going to be a very interesting summer, only in the sense that I'm very curious to see how the NCAA prioritizes, the notoriety of various programs, or if you're strictly going by the science, strictly going by the statistics, and only letting football happen in areas that are not quote unquote hot spots for
Well,
the
it'll be
virus.
interesting if you're in week 3 and there's an outbreak in Boston and Boston College is impacted and Boston College is 0-3, let's say. I mean, are you halting ACC play? Are you halting college football because of an outbreak at Boston College? That is a legitimate question because we don't know the answers to these things. But there's plenty moving along here. There's plenty happening in the sports world. On a more positive note, what a great weekend in sports. There were sports. And the Premier League is back. La Liga is back. I mean, it is just a fantastic time. I watched Premier League soccer this weekend, which was great. The Spurs were the same they were before the lockdown, so nothing changed there, unfortunately.
Right.
But Premier League is back. Golf is back in their second week. NASCAR is still going strong, and horse racing. How about that?
Belmont out of nowhere.
Yep, the Belmont State. I didn't even realize that was happening until I saw a commercial for it Friday evening. I was like, "Oh, Belmont Stakes happening tomorrow. Cool."
Yeah, you and the rest of America.
What was the name of the horse that won?
Tis the something. Tis the time. I don't know.
Tis the law.
Tis the law.
Yeah, that's a good name.
I think you tweeted, Austin, recently. I'm not used to planning my day around sporting events. And now
it crept up on me. I was looking at my ESPN app to see when the Premier League was getting going, and I was like, oh my gosh, Tottenham plays on Friday at 3:15, and I was home, done with my door dashing duties at 3. I sat down, I watched the entire Tottenham game, and then I got up and went back to work. But it was weird. It was very strange having to plan my day around a sporting event again.
Look, it's funny. I mean, if anything, it is positive news because it's hopeful for the future in the sense that these sporting events are happening, albeit with no fans, but they're happening because they're taking place in parts of the country, parts of the world that are simply less impacted right now. So back to our, first talking point where we began the show just a few minutes ago. I mean, is there hope? Yes, there absolutely should be, because at the end of the day, it's really all about the statistics and all about who is impacted or who isn't impacted right now. Just watching Premier League soccer again, and I don't even have a team.
Did you catch some of the action?
I catch some of the Chelsea match today, and
I will Christian Pulisic. I don't even know. There's so many ways to say his last name. Josh Eastern would tell me how to. But
I will say I don't mind the fake crowd noise. I think
I was just gonna say it grew on me as I watched the Tottenham game, because it felt like if you had told me if I had no idea that there were no fans there, I might have said, oh, the fans are making some good noise, and I wouldn't have noticed. I thought they did a good job of, if there was a foul, they plugged in some angry noise. If there was a goal, they plugged in some loud cheering with the Spurs chant. I thought it was pretty good.
I watched a little bit of both, and I think they both played well in their own way. I almost preferred watching it without crowd noise just because it made it seem more real.
Yeah, but, it did feel slightly like I was just watching a normal soccer game. But that's certainly some of the positive news to kind of counteract what we were talking about earlier with the negative with college football. Another one of the negatives in college or in sports in general is the MLB. And we're bringing in from the Chicago Tribune, covers the Chicago White Sox, LaMond Pope, to kind of give us the lowdown on the MLB. LaMond, can you hear us?
I can. How's it going, guys?
Good. Great to have you on here. Let's see if we can get your video going. There we go. Hey, awesome. I know you probably are sick and tired of talking MLB, talking all the doomsday scenarios. But what have the past few months been like for you? I mean, these are supposed to be some of the busiest times of your year. And instead, basically, we're all watching Jeff Passan's Twitter and just seeing what's going to happen with baseball. What's it been like for you?
Yeah, no, I mean, and this was going to be my first full season on the Sox beat. And so, one of the early trips was going to be to Fenway Park. I'd never been there. And so, and later on that April, I was supposed to go down to, over to Anaheim for the first time as well. It's always, always fun to watch Mike Trout play. And so, all those opportunities that were going to be happening just in April alone, kind of went by the wayside. And so, well, I was in Arizona when the sports world stopped. So the first thing I had to do was trying to find a flight back home to Illinois. Well, the first thing I did was make one more stop over at In-N-Out Burger and then make my way back here. But since then, the White Sox have been pretty good about holding conference calls, holding events. We've had the chance to talk to several players, Eloy Jimenez, left fielder, their ace pitcher, Lucas Giolito, Tim Anderson a couple times, their shortstop, won the AL batting title last year. So a handful of players we've had the opportunity to talk to in April and May. Some of those discussions have been about like some of the guys early on, like catcher James McCann, it was kind of early in the process. So like, what was he kind of doing to stay sharp and stay in shape? He mentioned that he lived close to former Cubs infielder Ben Zobrist. And so he would just go to Ben's place and hit off of Ben's, and Ben had like a batting cage. And so he utilized Ben Zobrist's batting cage. And so that's what he was doing. And then some of the other guys, like later on, like Edwin Encarnacion, he was in the Dominican, and he was helping on out with raising funds with Pedro Martinez. And so we had a wide variety of options and opportunities to talk to guys just to see what they've been up to as well. I think, as a staff, we've been, I guess kind of blessed to have something like The Last Dance, because that's kept us at the Tribune kind of busy, our NBA guys, and even, the White Sox when Michael did play, go on down to Birmingham. So we had a chance to talk to some guys that kind of helped him get prepared for that 94 season as well. And so it's been a little bit about that. Some of our staff writers have helped on out writing obits. Shannon Ryan, one of our ace college sports reporters, she's been all over that as well. One of my favorite stories that I've had the chance to do, there was a bridal shop that went ahead and switched on over and started doing masks. And Eloy Jimenez found out about that. And so he, I think it was like a group of 8 that worked there. He not only gave him $500 worth of groceries, but also gave him $500 just for spending money as well. And so that was a really, really neat story. And just being there when they received word about that, and just seeing the surprise and the happiness on their face was a really neat experience.
You don't have to look very far. There's plenty of positives athletes are trying to create here, even without sports. But let's talk MLB a little bit. What has kind of been the reaction around the White Sox for you in general with what's been going on, and kind of your take with the last month or so of failed negotiations?
Yeah, a whole lot of waiting and seeing, and kind of hopes get up, hopes get back down. When I got back at the end of March, I started thinking, well, there's no way that they're going to play because this virus. They just can't possibly see them playing. Which obviously the virus hasn't gone away. The Phillies, just this past weekend, and so that's got to be something that's going to be still on the minds of everybody that's involved when they do finally come to some sort of decision. And so then obviously you go from, in my mind, thinking, well, there's no way that they're possibly going to play, and then you start getting all these leaks and start getting all these possibilities. First, the Arizona plan, in which they're going to send all the teams to the Phoenix area and have them all play there and sequester them for 4 months in a hotel. And there's pretty prominent pushback from White Sox players like James McCann, like Steve Shishak. They both have families, and Steve said that he didn't want to be in a position where he was going to be leaving his family for 4 months during a global pandemic. And then some of the stars of the game like Mike Trout and Clayton Kershaw pushed back on that as well. And so that plan was pretty much not going to happen from the jump. So you had the Arizona plan, you had the Arizona and Florida plan, in which they were going to send all the teams back to their respective spring training homes. Then you had the Arizona, Texas, Florida plan. And so they finally decide, eventually they say, you know what, let's just stick to what we have right now as far as the division set up. And that took like 2 months, right? Like they couldn't even get, it's like, they had the March 26th agreement in place as far as the prorated salaries and, but they should have had something in place in the, I guess, the players' mind. They said, all right, well, we do have something in place and we're all set. And the owners were like, well, but if there's no fans in the stands, we're going to have to go back and talk this over again. But they should have had, a concrete set and plan where this negotiation, this ongoing negotiations, wasn't the thing that was going to be bogged down, because this was an opportunity for baseball. It's been an embarrassment. It's been a complete mess. This is an opportunity for baseball to be in that limelight, to have that center stage for at least a couple of weeks before, the NBA or one of these other sports really got back going again. And they blew it. They absolutely blew it. They did what baseball has always done, just absolutely, just failed miserably at doing something that could be very positive for the sport.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we're in a situation where, it's like, all right, well, is it going to be a 60-game season? Is it going to be a 54 to 60-game season? Is it going, are we going to have the expanded playoffs? And like I said, all of that with the background of knowing that, coronavirus is still out there, as we just found out, like I said, this past weekend with the Phillies situation.
Yeah. And, as you just alluded to a little bit there, I mean, everything that we've seen in the past, few weeks, if not the past couple months with baseball, has been just very on brand, very baseball, very MLB in that sense. I'm curious what the conversations between you and your staff, you and other writers covering other teams have been like, because I mean, there's no sugarcoating it. It's not looking great right now for the sport. I mean, what have those been like? I know you guys know just as much as anybody else right now. I have to assume you're sort of getting to the point where you're at least considering, what the rest of the summer, what the rest of your year looks like. Is it going to be more just, hunting for those feature stories? Like it's just such a pool of unknowns right now.
Yeah, actually, I had a discussion with my editor this morning, and we were, just kind of talking about, obviously, like those bigger features we can kind of work on those, or just sort of like look backs as well. Just this is the I think the 30-year anniversary of the final season at Comiskey Park, and so I talked to a few participants in that. This is the 100-year anniversary of the final time those guys that were associated with the Black Sox scandal. Obviously, everyone talks about 1919, but a number of those players, they played for a portion of the 1920 season before they were permanently banned from the game. And so kind of taking a look back and seeing what that final season was like for those guys as well. So projects like that can kind of keep me busy. But yeah, like I said, those things are going to eventually dry on out, and then you just kind of have to be creative and just kind of think on through. We got lucky with the baseball draft was just 2 weeks ago, and so I can reach on out to a number of those coaches or try to track on down and just kind of figure out and do bigger pieces on those guys, since there's only 5 rounds, and I did one already on the number on their first round draft pick, and so kind of doing stuff on the other 4 players and kind of going from there, and then you kind of regroup and then go at it again the next week and the week after that until they finally figure out one way or the other, if there's going to be a baseball season or not. And then even if there is a baseball season, then what's that going to look like, from our perspective? Are we going to be? We're not obviously going to have the same sort of access that everyone's accustomed to. So I think it's going to be like a sort of a situation where there's going to be like a Zoom meeting, with the manager a couple hours before the game. And they might get us a player. So the things that we're used to as far as like being able to go in the clubhouse, talking to any player that we want to, kind of developing those type of stories, it's going to be a little bit of a different and a unique situation for us, trying to figure out how the best way to and the best plan of attack for these games. And then there's been talk about, well, will teams or will reporters be allowed to go on road trips as well? And so just a whole lot of things that are up in the air, even if there is a baseball season, and then if there isn't one, we'll see.
Well, we've been talking about that too, covering IU events, just what that's going to look like here in the fall. But let's just throw that aside for a second. This is a White Sox team that arguably has had one of the best minor league systems here the past couple of years. They've been just collecting talent. If there is a shortened season, or just looking forward in the future of White Sox baseball, are we ready for that breakout season that people have been saying is coming for the Chicago White Sox?
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing about this spring and this entire offseason. It's sort of been building, this momentum had been building and building for the team and for the franchise. You mentioned some of those young players, like, we talked already about Eloy having 31 home runs last year as a rookie. They have probably one of the top prospects in the game this year, and Luis Robert. And so everyone was very excited to see him in action and see what he can do out in center field. And then, just the offseason moves that the team was able to make. They added Yasmani Grandal, who's the top free agent catcher on the market. They added a couple pitchers, Dallas Keuchel, Gio Gonzalez, so to sort of help fill out that rotation, kind of go along with guys like Lucas Giolito, Dylan Cease, Ronaldo Lopez. They're going to get Michael Kopech back off of Tommy John surgery. And so there's a lot of excitement sort of building with that rotation. A lot of young hitters, young stars from that standpoint as well, with Yohan Moncada over at third base, and Tim Anderson obviously winning the batting title as well. And so yeah, they're building and getting in that position where I still thought that the Twins were probably the favorite to win Central, but the Sox are going to be contenders in that sense. They haven't had a winning season. I think the last winning season was 2012. So not only were they in a position to have that winning season, I thought that they were going to be able to push the Indians there for second place and possibly been in position to contend for a wild card spot. Now with this shortened season, who knows what's in play, right? I mean, it just sort of depends on, there's no such thing really as a fast start, because, before you know it, the season's going to be over. So can they be one of those teams that can benefit? Obviously, you're in a division with teams like the Royals and the Tigers, so those are two teams that you're expected to win a majority of the games against. They had success the Twins dominated them last year, but they had success against the Indians, and so it's a situation where they're going to be games that are winnable, and they're just going to have a situation where they can possibly maybe split with the Twins and do well against the Indians, and maybe be one of those teams, especially if there's an expanded playoff, to be one of those teams that might be able to be in the mix there.
Could a shortened season possibly benefit the teams that have a deeper and more solid rotation? It feels like kind of postseason baseball always brings out the teams with the best pitchers. Could a shortened season do that as well?
Well, that's the interesting part about that is early on, especially how it's not like these pitchers are going to be able to go deep in games early on in the season, right? They're still, they've been kind of on this program, and the Sox have been kind of coy about mentioning how, what exactly have these guys been doing to kind of stay in shape and stay ready, because they don't want to give away, they don't want to give away any secrets, guys, I guess. But so it's going to be interesting just to see how, what kind of shape these guys are in, and what can they do from the onset. And really the thing is, if you're kind of carrying on up, you want to be in position. If you make the playoffs, that's when your guys are going to be there and be ready to go, for the long haul, right? So I think pitching. With any shortened season, long season, any type of season, pitching depth is crucial. Pitching depth is essential, and so those teams that do have the pitching depth, can possibly go a long way.
Do you foresee anything maybe similar to the NBA, where maybe they get a deal and then some of the players maybe have the similar opinions to guys like Kyrie Irving, Dwight Howard, Steven Jackson, who are saying, look, I think this might distract from the social justice movements around the country? Do you see that, or do you hear any rumblings, or are they just eager to make an agreement and get out there and play?
I think that they're conscious of that. They're going to be willing to voice their opinion, speak on out. There's been an ad that's run with a number of players like Tim Anderson, Curtis Granderson, getting out the social justice board and really making a positive impact. And so I don't think that's going to be lost in any sort of way. But I do think as well, yeah, these guys are, they're ready to play. But honestly, I mean, the big thing with this as well is just, are they going to be in a position to play because of COVID? I mean, when these guys all go back to their respective camps or, go back, I guess, everyone's going to essentially be able to go. The spring training would be held in their own ballparks, I guess, with the exception of maybe the Blue Jays. When they go back there and they have the testing, what's going to be the situation? How many guys are going to be positive, and then kind of going from there. I mean, that's going to be the big thing, kind of in the immediate impact is just how much will COVID affect the preparation for a shortened season.
I mean, kind of to that point, speaking to the movement of social, or bringing awareness to social injustice in our country right now. The NBA has sort of been dominating headlines in terms of, and it always has, in terms of being a players' league and, being at the forefront of, political movements, whatever they may be. Meanwhile, with baseball, as Austin sort of alluded to there, we've been so focused and, therefore distracted by the negotiations going on, and just, it's been difficult enough to get baseball back on the field. I mean, what is your experience been, again, in talking to other writers who cover other MLB teams? I mean, is this something that's being discussed to the extent that it is in, say, the NBA?
Well, I mean, from baseball's perspective, I remember the first weekend of protests. Players like Tim Anderson, Lucas Giolito, just from the Sox perspective, those two guys kind of stood on out. Lucas wrote a really powerful note on Twitter. Tim went around after some of the protesting. He went on out downtown Chicago, took some photos of some of the scenes, just to kind of capture the moment. We talked to him actually the day after, Monday after, and he said he wanted to be down there just to capture the moment, just to sort of see what the vibe was like, and kind of absorb everything. And so he has a couple of kids, and he wanted to say, instead of just saying, hey, this is what it was like during that weekend, he can show them and kind of advance along that way. So yeah, I mean, it has been discussed. It is something, and obviously the Major League Baseball as a whole. I mean, we're talking about a sport that obviously every April 15th they celebrate Jackie Robinson Day. Everyone wears number 42. There are other activities that teams do to remember Jackie, and that's and if someone comes away from that day wanting to learn more about Jackie Robinson, that's fantastic. It's also a reminder that for years and years and years and years prior to April 15th, 1947, there are very talented ball players that were not allowed, that were denied the opportunity to play in the major leagues simply because of the color of their skin. So that's 1947. When Jackie becomes the first. And then I remember when I was at IU as a student, I took a class, Sports in the African American Experience, taught by Professor Wiggins, or Dr. Wiggins. I think he died a few years ago. But one of the books that we read was a Hank Aaron book, and it went into great detail about the lead up to breaking Babe Ruth's record, home run record, 715. Well, 714 for Ruth, 715 for Aaron. And just the racist letters and that he received in the build-up to it, again, simply because he was a black man breaking Babe Ruth's mark. So that's 1974. And then obviously just recently the Red Sox they sent out a release that acknowledged that that fans had been making racist, comments to Torrey Hunter. And so the sport of baseball, as with everything else, there's work to do. There's always work to do. There's always work that needs to be done. I remember just recently, Kenny Williams, the Sox executive vice president, he mentioned how he was touched by the marches. It was something. But and he later acknowledged as well. It's like, what, it's a step, right? Obviously it's literally a step. You're out there marching, but the thing is now, what are going to be those next steps? It's one thing to do these social media posts. And now it's time to listen, to learn, and to develop a plan, and execute the plan as well.
Well, what has your message been in the past couple of weeks, kind of soaking all this in? I know there's a lot going on, but what has your message been to other people and even to yourself as we as a country try to improve upon where we are?
Yeah, I think as I sort of was alluding to, it is that it's listening, it's learning, it's acknowledging, it's and then again, it's developing a plan and executing a plan, and not just for the moment, not just for the short term, make it lasting, right? Obviously, I read recently, Zach Osterman's piece about IU, obviously making the change at the intramural building, and discussing other changes as well. So it's not, it goes beyond, the discussion is, it's a discussion about police reform. But it's also a discussion about reform in other sports or in other areas as well. It's sports, it's journalism, it's academic institutions like Indiana. It's it's groups within those institutions as well. And so it's making an impact and trying to make change, lasting change, up and down throughout all lines and all possibilities as well.
That was very well said. And LaMond, I know you and I kind of had to jump through some hoops with emails the past couple of weeks to try and get you on here, but I appreciate I'm glad we could finally make this date work, and great insight into the MLB, into our country as well. So thanks so much for joining us. Stay safe and healthy, and hopefully we've got some baseball coming up soon.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Anytime. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much, LaMond. That was LaMond Pope of the Chicago Tribune, covering the Chicago White Sox, or at least he's hopeful that he will cover the Chicago White Sox coming up. Let's move on to our second guest here. He is a man that Connor and I know pretty well. Graduated from IU just a year ago, I think, for Mr. Portnoy. We're bringing in Ben Portnoy. No, he does not work for Barstool. He works for the Columbus Dispatch, covering Mississippi athletics. Ben, how are you?
What's going on, guys? How's it going?
It's going pretty well. Glad to have you on here. There he is. We can
Sorry about that.
See the great face of Ben Portnoy. How's your quarantine been? I know you're down. Are you down in Mississippi?
I am. I'm still in Starkville. Staying busy. A lot going on around here. Had a couple of coaching changes and some protests and all that good stuff. So it's never a dull moment down here. But hanging in there, working on my golf game a little bit. So that's been good.
Where's it at?
We're getting there.
Okay, so it's not great, but it's getting better?
Yeah, definitely. Getting some of that consistency, right?
There we go. Well, like you said, there's plenty to talk about in the state of Mississippi right now. It's kind of become a little bit of a hub of sports here the past couple of days. What are your thoughts on what is going on right now? What reactions have you gotten from the SEC statements and what's kind of going down, and maybe explain it to those who may not know what's going on?
Yeah, so the general gist is that over the last basically 72 hours, the SEC and the NCAA have kind of clamped down on their stances on the Confederate flag and how states who do have that on their state flags, or I think the wording exactly from the NCAA is like flying properly, proudly rather, prevalently, are not eligible to host NCAA postseason events. That was kind of the most recent development. That came down on Friday. The last couple of days I've actually spent reporting on this. I had a story drop this morning kind of about this that kind of sums up the general gist of how Mississippi State and Ole Miss administrators have kind of dealt with that. But it's been pretty wild and has come pretty quickly. I mean, we've obviously seen a lot of activism on the Black Lives Matter front, and you've seen marches all over the country. There was a march here in Starkville about, I guess it would have been going on 2 weeks ago, that had, over 2,000 people. And I think was a really eye-opening experience for a lot of people around town. That said, obviously the Confederate flag is something that has been a hotly contentious issue here in the state of Mississippi for a long time. There have been attempts to change it. For those who don't know, the Confederate battle flag is in the top left corner of the Mississippi state flag. Most recently, it was in 2001. There was a referendum that was passed along the state, and about 64% of voters chose in favor to keep it. So that's kind of the next thing on the agenda. There's not anything at least pressing, but lawmakers are definitely being pushed in that direction. And Mississippi State and Ole Miss have both come out and said that they're in favor of changing the flag. Obviously, it does affect the student athletes that are on campus if they can't host games. And around here, baseball and baseball regionals are a huge draw. And not being able to host that is something that I think is brash, but I think we can all agree is something I think that, when something like that happens, it forces change. And I think generally speaking, that's a good thing.
I mean, what is it, considering everything going on in the country right now? I mean, I'm assuming there's blowback of some kind, because there's always going to be, and there's too many people in the U.S. for there not to be, confliction of feelings on this. But do you think, is there maybe a greater sense of hope than there has been before, given the political climate, given everything going on in America right now? Does it seem like more people are behind these changes that they're trying to, get through?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the thing that's been most interesting. And, I can't speak to it as much just because, I've only been in Mississippi for about a year and a half. But from the people I've talked to, people I know, friends on the beat, that kind of thing, I mean, this is as much at least push as there's been to change the flag in a long time. Again, I mentioned in 2001, this was something that was discussed and did actually go out to a vote around the state. But I think this is probably the most widely supported it's been in a long time. There's been votes to bring down Confederate monuments. I believe Ole Miss is moving the one that's in the center of their campus to a cemetery, kind of more secluded area. So there's been motions to move and sort of move away from this stuff, but I don't think it's without, its detractors. I mean, in Columbus, where my newspaper, The Dispatch, is based out of, last week, it went to there's a Confederate monument right in front of the courthouse in downtown Columbus, and that was voted down 3-2 by the county officials. And so, there has been pushback to get rid of them, but I think that, in a long-winded answer, there's a lot more push to change it, at least of late, than there has been in a long time.
Well, I've been hearing a lot of, sports aren't essential, football is not essential, and maybe in Indiana, football is not essential, but I want to get your take. You've been in Mississippi now for over a year. You went through the football season. How essential is something like college football to the state of Mississippi?
Well, I think that's something that I think, in states like Mississippi and Alabama, you see it with the Iron Bowl, you see it here with the Egg Bowl. I mean, these are states that don't have NFL teams and, if any, professional teams at all. And that's why these college teams and these college programs take such a big pull across the state. In Mississippi and Starkville, like, Mississippi State football games are as big as it gets. I mean, you got 60,000 cowbells going at a time, and it's loud and it's wild. And, it definitely takes a little getting used to. My eardrums might have been close to bursting that first game, but it's been cool. It's really cool to see, and it's a really cool tradition. But that said, I mean, it really is a huge piece to the state, and I think it's something that's ingrained in the state. I think that, people got a taste of that, at least nationally, in I guess it would have been 2015 when Ole Miss and Mississippi State were in the top 5, and, Mississippi State was having its Dak Prescott years and so on, and Hugh Freeze was still running things at Ole Miss. But I think that, like I said, in states like in Mississippi and like in Alabama, it kind of takes place of those professional teams and that people rally around. And I think that, for people around here, not having baseball season, not having football season would be a really, really big deal. And I think that's, a wild understatement.
Well, financially, how important are these football revenues? Not obviously, we know it isn't for the university, but just for the state's economy, it's got to be pretty important. Like you said, no professional sports, so that, in my eyes, that seems pretty essential.
Yeah, definitely. So I actually wrote a story about this about probably 2 weeks ago now, but talked to Mississippi State's athletic director, John Cohen, and the university CFO, Eric George, kind of about this, at least on Mississippi State front, is that, by not having football and by not having fans in the stands and that kind of thing, I mean, that's a huge hit to athletic department budgets. I don't have the numbers exactly off the top of my head, but I believe it was about, if Mississippi State was operating on about an $100 million budget, I guess in the 2017-18 year, and during that time, $14 million of that revenue came directly from football attendance. So if you cut that in half, or if you're only allowed 25% of the stadium to be filled, I mean, that's somewhere between $7 and $12 million that you're not going to have in that athletic department budget. And I think, we all know how important football is in terms of running actual athletic departments around the country. And, it's a system that's been in place for a long time, for better or worse. But I think this is sort of the test on it to see that, if football doesn't happen, you're going to see a lot of athletic departments have to, close programs or find new ways to adjust and find new ways to make money, because this is a really, really big issue. And just at least on the Mississippi State front, it's a massive issue. And I think that, it's being prepared for. And I think, people are running all sorts of models and trying to figure out a way to sort of avoid it. But it's something that I think people are a little nervous about.
Kind of looping back to the importance of college football in your area. LSU just had a bunch of players test positive. What are you hearing? I mean, I don't know how much, keeping in touch you're doing with people, you normally see during the college football season, but what are you hearing on that front? Is it hopeful that the SEC plays regardless of whatever else is going on in the country? Because for a while we heard that, the SEC is just storming on regardless, but now you have, I think 30 LSU players testing positive. Is that, obviously that's going to change something to some extent, but what are you hearing with the SEC specifically, because it is that important to the area?
Yeah, so the people that I've talked to at Mississippi State, I think the general consensus is the SEC wants to do whatever they're going to do it in unison. And I think that's the general understanding across the conference. I can only speak for what's going on in Starkville, but I think that, because of that, I think that it's kind of a waiting game. I think that people will get a better idea. I really think that around August 1 is kind of going to be around do or die time, whether, teams are going to push forward, whether teams are going to cancel, and kind of how that's going to go about happening. But I think that from a conference perspective, I think the general consensus is that I think people want to do what everyone else is doing. So it depends on that front. But I think that, people want to play the season. Mississippi State had 4 players test positive 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago. The next round of players that are coming back to campus are slated to start coming on Wednesday, I believe, with the 2020 recruits that they've signed, for the ones who weren't already mid-year enrollees, among some other guys. So I think that, presumably that there will be some more positive tests, because I think that's just kind of the way that this has gone and will go. But I think because of that, you're going to see more positive tests in Starkville, in Baton Rouge, and, Tuscaloosa. I mean, it's bound to happen. And I think that's the thing that people, I think, is sometimes not necessarily quantified, is that, people are going to test positive. It's just a matter of dealing with it and quarantining people and finding a way to go about doing it in a safe manner. And I think that's kind of the next step.
Well, it feels like forever ago, but both Mississippi schools made coaching changes, and they were not disappointing. They were certainly some big-name coaches, some big personality coaches. Lane Kiffin goes to Ole Miss. Mike Leach goes to Miss State. I mean, what has kind of been the murmurs around the state for these two head coaches, and what have you kind of heard from them?
Yeah, so I've had a couple of chances to talk with Mike Leach, that is, and I think that, it's going to be an interesting fit. I think that, Mike has done a really good job of winning games at places that frankly don't have long histories of winning games, whether that's Texas Tech or Washington State. And I think Starkville kind of profiles a lot like what a Lubbock or a Pullman do, kind of in the larger landscape of college football. Now, it's not a knock. It's just a sense that, it's a little bit harder to win in Starkville than it is in Tuscaloosa or in Auburn or, Baton Rouge. But I think that, the offense that Mike brings is obviously a lot of passing. It's something that has been tried in the SEC when he was with Hal Mumme at Kentucky and, to mixed results. But I think that, with how much teams are throwing the ball now, you saw it with the spread offenses that LSU was running, throwing the ball 35, 40 times. Obviously, Leach will do so more than that. But, I think that that's kind of the way that college football has gone, and just you're seeing a lot more passing. And I think that it'll be interesting to see how it fits. But I think that's generally the largest question is, can the air raid work in the SEC versus the Pac-12 or the Big 12, where, high-powered offenses are kind of a dime a dozen a little bit. So I think that's the biggest thing. And I think that, because of the SEC, because of the defenses that are built in the SEC, it's physical, it's down in the trenches, it's, hard-nosed football, and, kind of in the way of what, we all have seen it in the Big Ten, not necessarily from Indiana, but the rest of the Big Ten, maybe in recent years. But so I think that that's kind of the biggest thing, is just to see how that offense does fit. As for Lane Kiffin, I mean, obviously I'm here in Starkville, but I think that it obviously makes for two big personalities and two high-profile guys at schools that maybe sometimes fly a little bit under the radar in terms of the national landscape. But I think that, you're probably going to be hearing more about Mississippi State and Ole Miss, generally speaking, just when you have two kind of guys as kind of eclectic as Mike Leach and Lane Kiffin.
I mean, here in Indiana, we are not privy to the college football environment that you have.
Does it mean more? That's all we want to know. Does it mean more?
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean,
sorry to steal your question, Connor. I just felt like we needed to know.
That's how we need to sum it up these days. That's how we need to sum it up.
Doesn't mean more. I would say that people care a lot, and I think that people also care a lot in Ann Arbor and Columbus and in Los Angeles, but it's different. And I think it's kind of, what I was saying before is that you have a lot of states that don't necessarily have professional teams or other teams to latch around. And I think that sort of ties into it, where you have, schools and fan bases that are comprised both of, just both alumni and, people that didn't necessarily go to the schools as well. So I think that adds another level to it.
Well, kind of take us through, you've been through one Egg Bowl. I mean, I'm sure it's nothing like the Oaken Bucket. I mean, the Oaken Bucket's good, but the Egg Bowl, and it was quite the Egg Bowl as your first one, but kind of take us through why that game is so special and what that day was like for you.
Yeah, so it's been kind of a whirlwind, kind of, I guess, 6-8 months, even really a year since I've been down here. The season started with Mississippi State under a major NCAA investigation into, tutors completing coursework for guys. And that kind of started off on a number of off-the-field issues. But in terms of just pure good old-fashioned hate between two fan bases, I really don't know that there's two fan bases that hate each other more than Mississippi State and Ole Miss. I mean, it is just good, clean, old-fashioned hate. There we go. And I think that, you see it on the field. You see it every day in the bars and coffee shops and restaurants around the state. I mean, every town and every city and every place in Mississippi is either an Ole Miss or a Mississippi State town. And I think that's really what's really interesting about it. And I think, for this year's Egg Bowl, obviously Elijah Moore hiking up his leg and a 15-yard penalty for pretending to pee like a dog. And then Ole Miss goes and misses the extra point. I got to say, sitting in the press box, I was, typing my game story and trying to file it at the buzzer. And going about that and trying to deal with it was I'm not going to lie, sitting there, I think the general consensus amongst the media members was, what the hell just happened? But beyond that, I think, once that happened, you go down to the locker room and you go down to, or not the locker room, the media room afterwards, where Joe Moorhead is giving his post-game press conference and, basically comes in fired up. There's cigar smoke, celebratory cigar smoke creeping in from the locker room. You smell it in the media room. And Joe Moorhead comes to the stand and says they're going to have to, this is my program. They're going to have to drag my Yankee ass out of here. And it's just like –
And they did.
They did ultimately. But, just the sheer insanity of that sort of 20-minute span from the missed kick to Joe's comments after the game. And then obviously they make a coaching change about a month and a half later and bring in Mike Leach. I mean – it's pretty wild. And obviously, on the other side, Matt Luke was fired not too long after that game too. So I think it was there was a lot to process in terms of actually filing a game story. That was also something, and filing a sidebar as well. There was a lot to process and a lot to write about. But I think that, it was one of those things where you sit there and you're thinking, okay, like this is what college football is all about. I'm not going to say it's up there with the bands on the field type moment, but it was that kind of game where, you're watching it and thinking, wow, this is one of those games that's going to go down in the lore of this rivalry and in college football as a whole.
Before we go, you were at IU. I know it probably feels like forever ago, but not too long ago, just a year or so ago. How did IU kind of prepare you for where you are right now, and what kind of things have you kind of had to learn on the fly since you graduated?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, for me, I sort of followed the general path of write for the school paper, the IDS, the Hoosier Network, did some broadcasting stuff with some of you guys as well. So I think that, I think just being as multifaceted as I could be was something that I really wanted to be able to do. I mean, obviously my focus was writing and, trying to find what I could do and, do as much as I could. I wrote for the Fort Wayne paper for a couple of years covering the IU football team as a freelancer. And I think that was a really valuable experience for me, just sort of being around the program. And obviously it's a better program now than it was when I started covering the team. But I think that was a really valuable experience for me. I think the biggest thing that, I think there's no perfect science to it. And I think it's something that I and people who have been in this business much longer than I have are still learning is sourcing. I think that, there's no exact science to getting to know people and attempting to learn information. So I think that's something that I think just comes with learning on the fly. I think it's a matter of just being personable and getting to know people. I think that, when you're around a program enough and around the building and talking to people, I think that's, the most important thing. Just be around and, be nice, be respectful. And I think that, generally speaking, you can have a really good working relationship with a lot of people. And I've generally found that, when you're nice to people and get along with people, they're nice to you and get along with you. So, treat others how you want to be treated kind of thing. And I think it's been really great. And I think that's definitely the one thing that you definitely have to learn on the fly a little bit, but definitely IU prepared me big time for everything I'm doing now. And I definitely am thankful for my experiences in Bloomington and the year that I got to share the football beat with Hines.
Hines and Ben back together. Well, Ben, thanks for joining us. We're thankful that you gave us 20 minutes of your time. Stay safe, stay healthy. Hopefully we have some college football coming up, but enjoy your break and your summer, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, guys, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
That was Ben Portnoy of the Columbus Dispatch joining us. Thanks to both Ben and LaMond Pope, who joined us today. Connor, that's pretty much all we have today. Any final thoughts from what you took away from today?
No, that was awesome. I mean, great perspective from both of them. And, I think both college football and Major League Baseball right now are in positions where, I mean, when you look at the sports world at large, they're two sports that are not in a great spot right now. And it's just interesting to get perspective from media members covering them, but especially perspective from writers, because I think the writers, like Ben kind of alluded to there at the end, I mean, those are two incredibly well-connected individuals with their respective beats. So good perspective all the way around. Austin, we didn't really even hit on the NBA today, pretty much because there's not an update.
Yeah, it's the same as it's been for the past week or so.
It really is. But I mean, you see positive cases, continuing to spike in Florida, as you mentioned earlier in the podcast here. Suddenly it's not so, not so certain. You would think with the technology they have access to and the fact that you're going to have every one of these players wearing this ring that can predict symptoms of COVID-19 3 days before you become symptomatic and all of this stuff. You'd think that the NBA of all leagues would be the one to push through and figure it out. But I mean, no one's too big for coronavirus at this point, I guess. So we'll have to see how that comes about. But I mean, baseball and college football being the focus today just goes to show how difficult it is. But at the same time, as we've talked about already, there's hope because we're seeing the restart of the Premier League. We're seeing tons of racing. So we're watching live sports. It's fun.
We wanted to get Ben on. We want to get Courtney Robb on as well. A couple of recent IU graduates who find themselves in Mississippi, and this kind of felt like the right time. I mean, it just kind of fell into our lap with all the stuff that's happening in Mississippi right now. So we were happy to get Ben on. Happy to get LaMond on. Like I was saying at the end of that, LaMond and I were trading emails. We had times, and then we didn't. And he would say he's good for Wednesday, but we already filled Wednesday. So really appreciate LaMond's flexibility. We wanted to get him on. We finally got him on.
Yeah, a couple of Hoosiers on the podcast today.
Absolutely. And we don't have to have IU alums. If you're not an IU alum, but you are interested in coming on the show, I promise we will still allow you to join us. But thanks to LaMond. Thanks to Ben for joining us. Thanks to Connor for sitting in the seat virtually next to me. Connor, enjoy Bloomington. Hopefully I can get down there soon. But thanks again for coming on and co-hosting.
Yeah, absolutely. Please get down here. We had a little rain earlier today. It was kind of a nice break in the heat, but I'm honestly surprised at how busy Bloomington is right now. There are a lot of students around. There are a lot of people out and about, but it's not the same without you.
People that just wanted to go back to normal, just hustling back. But that'll wrap things up here for our Monday edition. Again, remember that you can catch all of our podcasts on Spreaker Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, wherever you want it. We have had some great podcasts, including if you are an Indiana basketball fan, you're tied to Indiana. That's probably why you're listening to this podcast. Will Sheehy was on with us on Friday. I mean, I would love to have an hour and a half with him, but we got 30 minutes with Will Sheehy. He was fantastic. Story time, really good stuff. That's on the Friday episode. Many other great guests, so you can go back and listen to all our shows, or you can watch us and see our great faces if you go to the IU Sports Media YouTube page. We'll be back Wednesday, 11 o'clock live on YouTube. But for LaMond and Ben and Connor, I'm Austin saying so long from Unpaid Intern.